Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another All Things M365 Compliance podcast. And I am Ryan John Murphy, of course, Compliance TS at Microsoft and former MVP. And as always, I'm joined by Nikki. Hi, Nikki.
Hi, Ryan. Hello, everyone. My name is Nikki Chappell. I'm a Principal Cloud Architect at Cloudway, and I'm a Microsoft MVP. And today, I'm really pleased to be joined by Anders, who we actually met face-to-face in MVP Summit. It was like probably 2 weeks ago now. Time's really flown. So it's fantastic to meet him in person, and I'm really pleased that he's agreed to be a guest with us today. Anders, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. Thank you for having me. Yeah, my name is Anders Olsson, and I work as security MVP within a company called OneWin in Sweden. So I've been working with this topic with what is now within Purview since 2008, actually.
And yeah, we're going to be talking a bit really about the history of data security and how it's as important or even more important today than it has ever been.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as I said, this company was created in 2008, and we working with Microsoft stuff only. So everything within security and what we know how in security and compliance. And back in 2008, I mean, we delivered, for example, information protection with what we had for the moment to use back then. We had the AD/RMS back then, the on-premises solutions that could only protect Office files back then. And we had the EFS encryption within Windows to handle non-Office files and so on. But back then, there was not so much need of information protection stuff. I mean, we had some discussion that is actually quite common today as well. There was a lot of discussion around bring your own device. There was a concern for every company, should we let the employees bring their own device into the company and so on. So I did a lot of recordings within Microsoft in Sweden around that. How should they treat new devices and so on? And there we discussed, yeah, it's of course important you restrict access to sensitive systems, your applications, and of course you need to have sensitive access to your critical data. So we discussed that if you protect your information and define who could access those and so on, it's more okay to bring your own device. But still, if we have one of 10 customers maybe cared about to protect the information. Compared to today, we have the same discussions again when it comes to AI and Copilot. What do I need to do before I implement AI solutions so it could have access to my data? Yeah, you need to restrict your sensitive content. You need to have protection of sensitive data and so on. So we have the same discussion now that we had in 2008.
Copilot is definitely putting in place information protection, even to the point I think I've seen some customers address the sensitivity labels that they've actually deployed already just to cope with Copilot, just to adopt Copilot. So it's a great subject to be talking about today.
Yeah. I think for a lot of people, it's a difficult topic, isn't it? That, particularly in Microsoft 365, it's an unstructured database. So it's completely different from, if you've got a line of business solution like an HR or a finance system, it's more structured. And so you can define the rules. When it comes to Microsoft 365, effectively, you've got a lot of files and, a lot of organizations haven't done much in the way of governance. Well, what data is where? So it's always that beginning, is it? Where do you start? Would you even start a project to be able to both identify and then protect your data?
Yeah, definitely. Should we start by looking some slides around how it's looked like for maybe back in 2008? I mean, this picture could be in 2008 when Nikki got to work, but it's definitely I think we should change that to maybe a little bit new one. Somewhere in 2008, I mean, we still worked at our office within a physical, large, big computer. We didn't bring that home, for example. And main on the information we created on daily basis within the work that was stored within the company, within a server room somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the most common case. So in that case, it wasn't so important to encrypt the data, because it was only already stored in systems where we had better control and so on. And if you compare to discussion with bring your own device as well, how we're working today, I mean, we can create information from everywhere, from all kind of devices. We can be everywhere when we create and work with information. And we also had a time of working at home, for example. Could look like this, for example. And I mean, with that, not only that we could work from anywhere and connect all kind of devices. I mean, back with the discussion of bring your own device. I mean, when we're connecting an iPhone, for example, the main backup solution will be iCloud. So I mean, regardless of what requirement we will have, we can make sure that most of the company data are appearing in other cloud services that is not sanctioned. That could be Dropbox, could be iCloud, could be some of the solutions. So we still need a protection where it will follow the files if they ends up in iCloud or Dropbox or wherever they are, for example.
And I think that follow the file is really important, isn't it? That no matter where it goes, you can only access the file if you've got explicit permissions to access it.
Yeah, exactly. And also the renaming of the products. I mean, everyone love when Microsoft change the name of the products, like. But for instance, when they changed the name to Purview, the old name was MCT5 compliance. Now we have the Purview compliance. And that's also that they are extending the workloads to extend to more kind of devices, more kind of cloud services. So they can further control the information with the whole life cycle of information, not only within the Microsoft products, not only with the Microsoft devices. We are getting solutions that will work on the iPad, the iPhone. We can inspect information in Salesforce, in Google, and so on with these kind of Purview solutions as well. So that's also something to get a better understanding of the renaming of the product as well with the Purview stuff.
Yeah, I think that's important, isn't it? That kind of the Microsoft products are not just focused solely on like Microsoft 365 or the Microsoft suite, or even just Azure, as you mentioned, that this can be extended into third-party applications as well, third-party databases.
Indeed.
Yeah. So that's one driver why it's important to be better control of the information itself. Another driver, what we see right now, is also the type of ransomware attacks that we're seeing right now. I mean, we had a couple of those for a lot of years as well. This is an example where we had different healthcare providers in Europe that were attacked. I think it was almost 10 years ago, where they not only took the information and did extortion on the company itself, but they actually got directly to the patients and said that if you don't give me money, I will leak your something document what you told your therapist or your nude photos before your surgery and so on. So we have a lot of different kind of attacks going on right now that is going under what is called the double extortion attacks. And this is mostly because we are better protected right now. We have more of a backup of our information. So when you have an attack from a ransomware group and they say that I want ransom or require ransom to give your information back, most have a backup of that information. And what they're doing back then is that, yeah, okay, but if you don't give me money, I will leak your information. So that's also something that we're seeing a huge increase of. For example, we have the Akira group, where a lot of attacks from different companies here in Sweden. And what they are doing, they also in advance take your information and they publish on their website, we have your data. We will, within this date, leak your information. So everyone could see that their information have been leaked and the date when they will leak information. So this is one example when they actually have confidential documents, contracts, agreements, personal information, and they publish a date. We will leak your information during this date.
So this is where, as I say, encryption really helps, because if they've stolen your data, they haven't got the credentials to get in. So they've just effectively got files that are worthless.
Yeah, exactly. And also that if we have control over the sensitive data, we have also better protection of detecting intrusions as well. I mean, today we have the Defender suite and the Android suite that could look at suspicious behavior during sign-ins, or suspicious behavior on the endpoints with Defender products. When we add the Purview solutions as well, we can see on suspicious behavior with the information. There could be exfiltration, there could be downloading, there could be other actions within the information itself. So by combining these solutions, we have a better protection of detecting intrusions as well. So we have a lot of gains here with all these type of products.
Perfect. So I think just going off what Nikki was saying there as well, having the ability to encrypt items to prevent access to those files is definitely a great place to start, but most customers find it quite hard to roll that encryption piece out. What's your experience of this, Anders?
Yeah, totally agree on that one. And I think one of the most important part when it's coming to roll out all kind of encryption technology is education of the end user. I mean, in most cases, if you are unsure what's happening when you encrypt something, and you've been working on a document the whole week, and then you come to work on Monday morning, and then you should hit the button to encrypt something, and you're a little bit unsure, what will happen when I encrypt content? What will happen when I share encrypted content? So one important thing here is to have good instruction for end user. This is how you should encrypt information. This is the outcome. This is how it works when you're sharing information both internally and externally with encryption. So everyone are sure of how to use it, what are the consequences of using it, and so on. So that's one important thing, rolling out encryption, to have user instructions. The other part is to have the routines in place for the governance as well. I mean, the same goes for when you have a backup. You need a restore system as well and test your restore system. The same goes for encryption. If you're working with encryption, you need to have a routine for decryption as well. For example, during offboarding, when you have offboarding of employees within the company, how do you handle encrypted content to those users? And of course, there is technique for this, but you need to have that in place before you roll it out.
Yeah, I agree.
So those are the two most important things, to have then the user instructions and have all the routines in place for the governance part and operation part, how to operate this in the longer term.
Yeah, agreed. And have you found that an easy process to roll through from a customer perspective? And the reason why I ask is because Copilot is literally front and center of everybody's mind right now. They want the ability to go through and be able to encrypt and apply the right access levels to files. But most customers, especially from my experience, and I think we mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, Nikki, when we were talking, they're kind of like, I don't even know what my data landscape looks like. You know, I don't know to date what breaches Copilot is gonna intake. You know, data spillage, over permissioning, and so on and so forth. So, how have you found that? And are those conversations you're having right now more aligned to the purview rather than just the ability to encrypt files?
So the main problem when you work with all the things within purview is that compared to the other security stuff where you work with the IT department, when it comes to the purview stuff, you need to involve the business itself before you start in this project. So regarding the question, how should you start with the purview stuff? The first thing you need to do is to involve the business itself. So in the most cases of most projects, I invite the business, that will be one stakeholder from each department, or maybe several stakeholders within R&D, for example, someone from the board members, someone from the HR, someone from R&D, communication, and so on, into a workshop where we first of all, express why we need their involvement. What is the risk of information leakage, and how important is it for the company itself to control the data? That's a good start of this. And also to demonstrate what kind of solutions do we have, because it's become an issue to ask someone that is not an IT person that may be handling critical data, what kind of protection do you need, if they don't know what is possible. So during this kind of onboarding, we can present all the kind of nice features and possible solutions that we have to get a better understanding, and then work with the stakeholders. What is your sensitive data? What is your critical data? So that's a really good start to involve the business that is actually needed to start doing anything within Purview. And what we also can do, if you're going to go somewhere, you need to know where you stand right now. And as we talked about around unstructured data within MC35, we have all kind of solutions to identify sensitive data. So what we can do as well is work with the stakeholders to identify their data. If you have R&D information, if you have HR information or other critical data, we can set up an identifier within Purview that is running, for instance, data loss prevention. We can do a content search. We can look at all the different stages of information. That will be data in rest, meaning information that we have stored within SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams. It could be files stored at local computers or even local file servers. And then we can use in data in transit, we can identify information that are being moved from different locations. How many certain files and information are moved from a device into USB drive, from a device into Dropbox, Google, or M365, for example, for data in transit, as well data in use. When someone is writing an email or doing a presentation, we can see exactly when they are writing sensitive content. So with this, we can start to identify information without doing any action at all that will appear for the end users. And then we can present this for the stakeholders. The current situation you have right now, that you have R&D data going to Dropbox, or that you have this kind of HR information that are emailed to these domains, for example. And that was also important input for the stakeholders, because when they see that, they, oh, okay, that shouldn't be possible, or that should be restricted, or that is how we work right now. And with that, you can create a pilot design, meaning we can set up the different sensitivity labels, different encryption, the different limitation, for instance, HR information, who should access the HR information. These are the departments. In that case, we can set up a solution that we also can pilot with these stakeholders. Because what is really important when we talk about encryption is that we shouldn't block the business. And there could be that you have solutions in place that doesn't support encryption, for example. We maybe have some archiving solution. We maybe have some other third-party service that doesn't support the encryption technology. We need to make sure that if this is the case, to make sure what information can we encrypt, what information can't we encrypt. And when we apply encryption, who should have access to the content? Because exactly what you said, Ryan, since before Copilot, it was important to encrypt the information for the whole company to restrict external leakage. And I totally recognize what you say in that now customers come back, yeah, but we also need to limiting this information to HR or this information to R&D or this information to IT as well, to prevent Copilot from accessing, or a user accessing, the wrong information as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's a good point to leverage as well, given the fact that the conversations that I've had previously is it's more around that departmental segmentation that people are looking at now from a Copilot perspective, ensuring that finance, legal, HR, or acquisitions and mergers, or whatever the case may be, or whatever the topic of the day may be, does have the right access lists in place, but has the right encryption and the right people having permissions on that encryption. So Copilot can't bring that information back. You know, as you see everywhere, can Copilot see my CEO's salary? Well, yes, if it's on a SharePoint site with an anyone link with no encryption on, of course. But that's kind of the conversations that I'm having at the moment on a reorganization of labels. What do you think, Nikki?
Yeah, exactly the same. So it's kind of really that strictly confidential group, where before you might have had strictly confidential, encrypted to everyone in the organization, and then, you know, strictly confidential user defined permissions, so it was ad hoc. But now you want strictly confidential HR, and targeting it at a group, you know, whether that's, you know, the HR team or teams or a security group, and in a, not to make sure you don't explicitly put people's names in those predefined groups. It's how are you going to describe the business? So it now becomes more than just the data. It's describing who should have access to the data. And then that can become challenging, because then they say, I want this data locked down to HR. And then you find out, well, it's not just HR. There's some payroll information that has to go over here. And then there's some other information goes there. So it's really difficult sometimes to actually define and maintain those boundaries.
Yeah, indeed.
But that's also that's something we can add as well, because it's quite a new feature. We maybe we can explain that for the listeners as well, with the predefined permissions and the user-defined permissions.
Yeah, so absolutely.
Basically, we can determine the settings from the labels itself, saying this is the HR department. We can add, for instance, users, groups, external companies, and so on, in a predefined label, saying this is HR information. They are working with these partners, for example, that should have access to the content. And then we had the other thing that is called custom permission or user-defined permission. This is more of a label that I can use and say this is confidential or highly confidential secret data, where I, as an that's writing the information, can define the permission myself, and saying this information should be accessible only for that user, that group, and that external company, for example. And what we did get for, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks ago, is the support of open these files within the online services, because this is something that we have had within the RMS solution for 25 years, but it only worked within the locally installed apps. So since before you were only able to open those in a locally installed Word, locally installed Excel or PowerPoint. But right now, since 3 weeks back, it's supported to open those files within Word Online, within Excel Online, PowerPoint Online, as well as the Teams platform, for example. So that was a real lift for the solution, I would say.
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree with you. And just as you were talking there as well, Anders, I had a unique scenario with a customer. He was on the EAP for Copilot. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to be able to segment all those interactions, all those documentations that are created by Copilot away from the data classification and taxonomy that they had to date. So we had the idea of creating a specific label just for Copilot stuff, if you like, to make a broader statement, and also a retention label for it also. Now that helped them because they didn't want to pollute their already deployed sensitivity labels and have Copilot make the decision, or the actual individual make the decision of having the wrong label applied. The flip side of that as well was, if they were to ever go through any discovery or an investigation internally, they could just target the GUID of the sensitivity label and, of course, the retention label to bring all of that data back that Copilot has generated or created or interacted with. So there's also that as well. I think that people are starting to lean towards a little bit. Number one, as I mentioned, not to pollute their already deployed sensitivity labels if they don't need to revisit them. And secondly, to have the audit trail incomplete on the other end of it when it comes to the investigation piece as well. So there's that as well for food for thought, as they say.
And I think, isn't it in preview at the moment, a new user interface in the Office apps for the user-defined permissions? Because at the moment it's quite complicated. That's the feedback that I get from the business users. Is that I've got this kind of, it's quite an old-fashioned display. You have to click through and say, do I want to give this person view rights or edit rights? And then you have to either put in people's names or email addresses or domain names or groups. And it's just a bit complicated. So I'm glad Microsoft are trying to make it more user-friendly, because that's the risk, is if you're relying on people labeling content, if it's going to be a burden to them and if it's going to stop their productivity, they are not going to use that encrypted label. They'll just go and pick general, because general means it's unencrypted and they can do what they like with it, even though it's got corporate secrets in it.
Do you know, Nikki, that's the biggest drawback with user-defined permissions I've seen. I've literally seen customers walk away from user-defined permissions because of that old-fashioned outlook that it brings up. As Anders is showing you here, it is not the greatest, but, you know, we are good at listening at Microsoft, and, you know, we will take feedback, and if we can make it a little bit more seamless, then, as Nikki says, we will do that. But for me, that's one of the biggest draws back of user-defined permissions for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's just show that we can just keep that. So this is the old that we have had for, this is the same that we had in AD RMS for 25 years ago. So this is how it looks like with the current version. And if you switch to the beta version of Time Signature apps, you will get a new layout that would look like this instead.
And that's a familiar look and feel for everybody, right? Because that to me looks like SharePoint sharing also.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like it.
If you're putting specific people's email addresses in, and then that person leaves the organization and you leave the organization, you can end up with encrypted files that no one can open. So that goes then back to Anders' point of having that offboarding process, isn't it? Just to make sure you don't end up with a lot of corporate information that's encrypted, and there's no easy way to access it without that super user permission.
And in your world and in your experience, Anders, what does that offboarding look like? Are we simply talking about the great use of the AIP super user?
No, we want to avoid that as much as possible.
Yeah.
So you have different routines that you can do when it comes to offboarding. I mean, it's sort of depending if you have a new employee for the same role. Maybe today you have a salesperson, and the process may be today that the new salesperson have access to the old mailbox. That could be one sequence or routine that are in place already, and that will work for unencrypted data. But as soon as something have been encrypted to the previously employed, you can't open it. What you can do, and what we mostly have in routine for this, is that you using the old person's email address as a proxy address for the new user. Since what's happening during decryption and during authentication is that they are using your email address.
Mm-hmm.
So if you add the email address for the old user into a new user, they can open everything that is encrypted both internally and externally to this user, for example.
Yeah.
So there is different kind of scenarios how you can achieve this. Mm-hmm. So that's one common example. Another one is that it's mostly when you have what is called the user-defined permission that you have this kind of problem. When someone have received emails with the do not forward or encrypt-only encryption. When it's come to the predefined labels, I mean, in that case, we don't have any issue because we can do on the IT side, we can define permissions as well. So when it comes to this user-defined permission, it's either that you take ownership of the old account, same sequence, or that you, in the last sequence, using the super user role with access to all information that is encrypted by your own tenant. Mm-hmm. But as always, this account or this role should by default will be disabled. You should have audit of that role in all cases. So as soon as someone is enable it or assign it to someone, it should go an email or incident to someone else, because this is a critical role that we are having, and this shouldn't be used in a normal case.
Yeah, I see it used too frequently for those offboarding scenarios, which always makes me feel a little bit uneasy giving somebody that type of permission, especially with what it does, right? You can literally go through anything and decrypt anything you want. So great advice there. Thanks, Anders.
Yeah. So I mean, if we continue the onboarding of a new Purview customers after the pilot that we have on the screen right now, when we have a design that is approved by the business, first of all, that's a goal. If you have stakeholders from HR, from the R&D that say, yeah, this is a good solution. We sign on for this, and we getting an ambassador out in the business that say this is a good solution. I've been part of it. Then it's more easy to roll this out. And the other part is, yeah, as I said, when it comes to roll out, we need to have, for instance, the user instruction how to use it. And there you have a good possibility to, for instance, create a guideline page for the end user. This is how you should work with information. This is how you should share information. This is what's happening when you encrypt information. And what you can do is that you can map this to your Office apps. So as soon as you click on the sensitivity in all those apps, you have a learn more button. And that can be redirected directly to the company defined page where how you should work with information. So this is an example of one of those pages that we have created for a customer where they find guidelines. This is how to protect an email, this is how to protect a document or presentation, and so on.
Yeah, that's a good, I like it. Very good image. And is this available on your website, Anders?
But this is what we do for every customer. So in the most cases, this is customized for the customer itself.
Okay.
With their intranet and so on, what they are having, for example. Yeah.
I see. Yeah, I really like that image. Very, very informative.
Yeah. And I think that's what we need to do is we need to help inform and kind of the end users, because that's the weakest point of any solution, isn't it? If you're asking people to label content, they need to understand why they need to do it. So it does need to be embedded into onboarding processes as well. You know, how does it all work? Speaking to a colleague recently, started a new organization, had no training at all about all the sensitivity labels, you know, and they was just presented with a big list of them.
I'm a big fan of making sure your employees understand the data that they're working with, for them to be able to understand the correct level of sensitivity that needs to be applied. That's why I kind of like and dislike the default labeling aspect, because people just get lazy with it. They just leave that default label on, and before you know it, you have millions of items with the default label, and nobody knows any more than what they did when the default label was published, right? And then all of your sensitive information is now labeled general, you know, which never helps. So I'm a big advocate of putting training programs together for people to understand the data they're working with.
Actually promote both of them. User instructions so people know how to classify information, but I actually promoting a default label, because if we have that in place, if we had it for a long time, for instance, if your files ends up in a USB drive, for example, in that case, you can easily see what files come from this company, basically because they are default labeled, and this is read by third-party services, Microsoft services, and so on. And as well, when we are rolling out different data loss prevention solutions, we can base that on the default label itself. So I mean, in combination with DLP, we can add default label, meaning that you maybe have, if it's default label, you can't put it in a certain location. You need to relabel the file before you can move it to a certain location, for example. And in that case, we align with this, because if you have the option to require the end user to set a label, in many cases that leads to misclassified information. Someone is just clicking on something. Yeah, it worked if I clicked on public.
Yeah.
The one on the top of the list.
Yeah.
The
first one on the list.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's my personal take for it. It's mostly to have a default label, but it's totally depend on the business itself, of course.
Yeah, for sure. And I think in the right circumstances, definitely. I think if it's departmental, in my experiences, then that label is going to be the one that's applied to 99% of the documentation. Fine. But if you're just a general user, my experience has been that they'll just leave that default label on, and you end up with all sorts of mechanisms, spiders webs, where highly confidential, top secret, whatever the case may be, is just literally labeled as public or general. But like you say, there is definitely a use case for it, and I'm an advocate in that perspective. So for anybody listening, work out the scenarios where you need that default label, and work out the scenarios where you think it's beneficial for your employees or your customers to understand the data that they're working with and try and label that themselves.
And I think that comes back to where Anders was showing this diagram. The very first step of this was that business introduction. Get those stakeholders in, get them to describe the data, their wants and needs. They'll tell you whether it's all of a similar type or whether they're dealing with multiple different levels of data. And the good thing is you can create more than one label policy. So you can target a specific policy, maybe more restrictive policy, to your HR department, and have a more general policy targeted to other groups of users. So that the business introduction, the business personas is critical, I think, to all of this. So I know we're nearly at the top of the hour. It's been absolutely fantastic having you on the show, and it's really, really interesting. It's got to be one of my favourite subjects, and also I think one of the most complex when we're dealing with customers on data encryption.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
You're very welcome. All right. Well, I think that's time again. So once again, thank you to Anders, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks for listening and watching. Bye for now.
Thank you.